And we are back with another episode of Before You Buy, that show we give you some straight up gameplay and our first impressions of the latest games releasing. And today we're talking about Kingdoms of Amalur: Re-Reckoning. Now, this is for some quick impressions. We haven't gotten through the whole game yet. This is mostly early game footage, just so you know. But some context, THQ Nordic has been doing some crazy stuff in terms of remasters, remakes, and re-releases and stuff. And this time around, it's the short-lived Kingdoms of Amalur: Reckoning, getting the remaster treatment as, Kingdoms of Amalur: Re-Reckoning. See what they did there? Isn't that funny? This game is exciting, though, just because it's a game from 2012 with quite a bit of interesting video game history behind it, but also it was just an ambitious action-adventure RPG that was solid and kind of became a cult hit that never really had its big time in the sun. I personally never finished it back in the day, but I thought it was cool. It had some big-name creatives behind it. The head of design had worked on design for the Elder Scrolls games. Famous fantasy writer R.A. Salvatore had worked on the world building and the lore, and freaking Todd McFarlane did some of the art, and Grant Kirkhope did the score, which is actually really big and epic. There's a lot behind the scenes that make the development an interesting tale, but the talent involved was really worth paying attention to, and ultimately, in 2012, this was a pretty good, well-received action RPG. And for the most part, it kind of still is in 2020. It doesn't look much better. There's not really much new going on, but it's nice to revisit. It feels kind of old, actually. I might even dare to say it feels older than a game from 2012, but if you can get over that, you have yourself a fun RPG in a cool world. I don't quite know why they re-released it, how it is, and how much it costs, but hey, whatever. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. So, from the outset, you create a character, and it's a pretty good character creator, with sliders and stuff. You choose from a few different races, you build the character up, and then you're dumped into this massive world and story. You are someone who managed to die but be revived by a scientist with the Well of Souls, this experimental thing. This makes you special in this world full of creatures, humans, elf-type people, gnomes, and death and reincarnation, sorta. There's also a war with a sort of immortal beings, and it all gets really complex. I'm glossing over it, but combat and RPG stuff is where the fun really lies here. You've probably seen it compared to Fable, either now or back in the day. Kind of like, hey, this is Fable, but with way better combat. And as a massive Fable fan, I can confirm the comparisons are right. You wander through some very cool atmospheric fantasy environments and kill monsters and bandits with swords, bows, and magic, but there's quite a bit more to it, and it's a bit more fast-paced and a little bit deeper. There's defensive shields, and if you get the timing right, you can get a parry-type bonus on an enemy. There are different timings to swinging your weapon. There's attacks where you can hold down a button. The long-range attacks can be held down. You have mappable quick-use items. You have mappable magic attacks, and you also have a dodge, and you can basically cancel out of any attacks with this dodge. So combat feels pretty quick and responsive despite the game's age. You can also switch weapons and stuff and get kind of creative and nasty with it all, and that's really cool, especially with the hammers and the broadswords, which feel really satisfying. There's also Reckoning mode, which you can trigger as a character manipulating the threads of fate, meaning changing the course and outcome for an enemy's life by basically just activating kick-ass mode here. Time slows down, you hit all the bad guys and finish one off with a really cool quick time event so they all die at the same time and you gain more EXP. Combat isn't always super challenging, but it manages to still be engaging, and it's fun to just mindlessly do cool stuff. Plus, some of the boss encounters are really cool. You gain XP by doing quests and killing stuff, and then you level up, and you can dump a point into skill trees like alchemy or blacksmithing or persuasion or lockpicking, and then you can dump a few skill points into active and passive abilities for finesse, might, or sorcery. These are essentially 3 different playstyles, but you can kind of bounce around between them. And for good reason, so I'll break them down. So finesse is the rogue style, basically. It embraces moving fast, lighter armor, cool dual daggers, and stealth assassinations. Might is the knight guy. Swords, shields, melee damage bonuses, plate armor, you've been here before. Sorcery is wizard robes, using more of your magic abilities and using staffs or other magical items as weapons. You can also embrace fates and choose designations that will give you further bonuses, and it just kind of all builds from there and gets more complex over time the more you play it. Now, here's the thing though. I love all 3 play styles because they're awesome and fun. You know, using the daggers is satisfying because they're fast, but being a big brute with a massive sword and shooting lightning is fun. But even the mage or sorcery type character is a blast. I usually don't go for this type of build, but the weaponry is really fun to use, and the robes look cool as hell, which is rare in this genre sometimes. There's so much to mess with though between all of this RPG building and then the gathering ingredients for alchemy and blacksmithing or just sneaking around stealing stuff from shops and NPCs. It's that type of RPG, you know, one where you can really just kind of mess around and have fun and see what sticks. I could see why maybe some Elder Scrolls fans like this type of game. It's not as complex as that, but it's there and it's cool. The environments also, while very atmospheric and there's some good variation, there's lots of big bland stretches that make it feel kind of like an old MMO. But on the flip side, dungeons and towns and NPCs all have that fantasy RPG charm to them. And as bland as the environments are and a lot of the pathways are, I do want to point out that there is some vibrancy here and there. There is some really interesting fauna. And again, even if there are empty stretches, I do think like coupling it with some of the visual style and the music, there is some atmosphere here, similar to something like Fable. Not really in the same style, but just similar in the sense of how it's kind of inviting, it's kind of attractive, it's like you want to just kind of explore it, you can't help it. Charming is the word, even though that's kind of overused, but yeah, maybe you get what I mean. Also, I only briefly mentioned it in the intro, but I think that coupled with the really damn good score seals the deal, and it is, I think, part of the whole package for why people really just had fun with this game. They clearly spent a lot of money on the music here. Big sweeping orchestral themes, all that mythical fantasy music, from creepy dungeon music to big sprawling epic battle music. There was definitely some cash ponied up in the production value department. I mean, this was originally an EA game. I guess that's one positive now you can look at, like now this isn't an EA property, so yeah. Anyway, I also will say for newcomers, for some RPG fans, there is some solid dungeon crawling here. If you like just kind of diving into a dungeon, going through it, getting that thing you need, or fighting that monster, there is plenty of that here. You know, voice acting is suitably right in the middle for this type of thing, you know, a little over the top, a little weird, but also just interesting. The game, like right out of the gate, freaking overwhelms you with quests though. It's insane. It's a lot of filler, but there are some interesting bits of words and world building there, and you'll get distracted from the main quest like almost immediately. But if you're interested in the world and the combat, I don't really think that's a bad thing. If you're just looking for like a new world to get engrossed in, some new lore to get engrossed in, some people might find some of it generic, but I couldn't help but find it interesting, at least at times. And jumping into this, for me, I think it's just a good chill out B-tier game for 2020. Like hop in, do some quests, get lost in a world, kill some stuff. That's about it. You know, it doesn't really do anything wrong, and nothing is a complete disaster. As you can tell, I'm kind of whatever about this game because it barely feels like a remaster. You know, it looks pretty damn close to the original. It's just maybe a bit sharper. There's tons of bloom lighting still from the old days, which actually I kind of like still as just an aesthetic. And the load times are still really long. I was playing on a PS4 Pro though. Now I've seen PC players saying it's just the same thing again, but apparently it will have real mod support at some time. But in a remaster or re-reckoning department or whatever, I would chalk this up as, you know, kind of disappointing. They could have done a lot of exciting things here. But I will say, they have announced that they are working on an expansion for the game that adds a substantial amount of hours to it, which is pretty cool for people who really love this world and fell in love with it back in 2012, because more content is good for something like this. You know, it is a charming game world. But the game itself is $40 and doesn't feel like much of an upgrade, like I said, especially on PC, if you might have the original version on Steam already. You know, I'm happy to have a newer version, looking slightly better on my TV while playing it on console, but $40 seems a bit steep, you know? I expected a little bit more out of this one. Still, I am happy that this game is getting another chance to shine. I always say it, but we need more B-tier games like this. Those mid-level, mid-budget games by a middle studio, even if this one technically did cost quite a bit to make. I know the game's loyal following is happy to just have it back at the forefront at least in the conversation in 2020. Maybe more will come from this. Maybe if THQ sees that people are embracing this brand, maybe they'll try and make another game, take another crack at it. I don't know, I'm spitballing. And of course, this is a before you buy. I give you some pros, some cons, and some personal opinion. And now I want to hear yours down in the comments. Again, I want to acknowledge this is just quick first impressions, but I want to know yours. If you jumped into the game today, or if you're planning to this week, what are you thinking? Do you have fond memories of the original game? Did you play it at all? Maybe you didn't, and you just want a new kind of basic action RPG to jump into. Maybe you're chomping at the bit. I don't know. Let's talk about this stuff down in the comments below. You know, your build, your favorite characters, stuff like that. We want to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, clicking the like button is the best way you can help us out. We really appreciate that. Hopefully we helped you guys stay informed, but also consider subscribing, maybe hitting that notification bell, because we put out videos every single day. Either way though, whatever you do, thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.